Okay, my name is Brenda Sheik, and today is May the 27th, 2014, and we are in Stillwater, Oklahoma in Payne County, interviewing Dr. Charles Cox as part of the Voices of Extension Oral History Project. And thank you, Dr. Cox, for joining us.
You're very welcome.
So first I'd like to talk a little bit about your early life. Where were you born?
I was born in Eureka, Kansas, lived there just a couple of years, and then moved to Oklahoma. Been an Okie pretty much my whole life.
And how did your family come to live? How did they come to live in Eureka, Kansas? And then how did they come to live in Oklahoma?
Okay. Well, my dad was a cowboy, and so he was working up in Kansas on different cattle ranches, and the opportunity came for him to go to Tye Valley, which is down in Pittsburgh County at the foot of the Jack Fork Mountains, to manage a beef cattle ranch there. And so we moved from Kansas to Tye Valley. It was way out in the boondocks, 28 miles each way on the school bus to go to Haleyville, where I went to elementary school in Pittsburgh County. Then after that, we moved to Carter County, north of Dixon, working for the same guy at the Goddard Ranch. And my dad continued to do beef cattle there for him. And I graduated from high school at Dixon, just a little ways east of Ardmore. Went to school at MIT, Murray and Tishomingo. Then I came to OSU, and I've been part of OSU ever since.
So you came to OSU as a student?
I did. I had become familiar, obviously, with the campus because I was involved in 4-H, and actually considered a degree in horticulture, but I wasn't really sure what I could do with a degree in horticulture, even though I like growing plants. And so I did agronomy instead of horticulture, now plant and soil science. But the main reason that I did that was because one year at State 4-H Roundup, I went to a horticulture workshop where we did plant propagation. And it was fascinating. I enjoyed it. And that was probably the main reason that I came to school at Oklahoma State University. Was accepted, surprisingly enough, whenever you're applying to go to college, you've done the ACT test and you just start filling out all the random places to send your information. And so just for the heck of it, I sent my information to Harvard and Yale and Princeton and OU and Oklahoma State. And surprisingly enough, I was accepted or offered an opportunity to go to school at all those universities.
Wow. But
chose to come to Oklahoma State.
So what did that feel like to get accepted to Harvard, Yale, and Princeton?
It wasn't that exciting at the time. As a high school kid, it was kind of more of a joke than anything.
How funny. You talked a little bit about your father and what he did. Tell us about your mom.
Okay. My mother, for the most part, was a stay-at-home mom until I have 3 older sisters. And the parents' expectation always was that we would go get an advanced education, that high school was not enough. Neither of them had had an opportunity to go to college, and they felt like that was very important. So we pretty much grew up knowing that we would go to school somewhere. And so whenever my oldest siblings were in high school, that we needed more income, then she went to work also. And she was a good seamstress, and so she actually went to work in Ardmore. There was a company that made leather jackets, and so she went to work. I think it was part of Tandy or somebody. And so she would make leather things, and then later she worked for Uniroyal. It was kind of the biggest employer at the time around Ardmore, and so she worked there. And so she was always real involved she was very supportive of us as kids, but then, in high school, she was working pretty much the whole time I was in junior high and high school. And then after she retired and after my dad passed, now 15 years ago, she is like overextended herself. She does all kinds of things in the community, volunteers for all kinds of things through her church, and is real involved with her Extension Homemakers group, her OHCE group, and volunteers to be a superintendent at the county fair, and still raises horses at over 80 years old, but she's a go-getter.
So describe your parents' interaction with the Cooperative Extension Service. Were they in 4-H?
My dad was in 4-H and also in FFA whenever he was a youth. He grew up near Saddle Mountain, down by Mountain View, that area, and showed pigs. He would tell stories about showing his hogs, but I don't think he was very actively involved. My mother grew up in Oklahoma City, and she never was really involved as a kid. Now, she did help some as a volunteer. She was never really an official 4-H volunteer whenever we were in school. She helped my sisters tear out a lot of stitches. I think one of my sisters that was probably the most active in 4-H of our family still tells stories, and still has, I believe, her headscarf and apron and pillowcase. She laughs about how terrible it looked because she had to take out the stitching so many times. And now she tends to be a bit of a perfectionist. That may be kind of a downfall of some of those projects, or a mother that would stand over you and say, nope, that's not straight and you need to redo it. But they were supportive, and actually helped a lot of other young people that were part of our club and community with picking out show steers, because my dad sold a lot of club calves to kids that right off the ranch that were a lot cheaper than what they could buy from somebody that was really in that business. And so they were pretty supportive in that regard.
So what were some of your first memories of 4-H?
Well, my very first memory as a 4-H'er, I always loved animals, and so I wanted to take something to the county fair. And the first year that I was able to take an animal to the county fair, I took a trio of California rabbits. They're the white rabbits with the black ears and feet and nose and so forth. And so my dad and I got the rabbits a few days before, got them out of the pen, got them all cleaned up, trimmed their toenails, gave them a bath, and made sure their white was white and their black was black, and all those kinds of things. And so we took them to the county fair, the Pittsburgh County Fair. And after school, I went to see how my rabbits had done. And so I go running into this really wasn't a barn, it was more of a shed, where they had the chickens and rabbits, and everybody's cage had ribbons on the cages except mine. And I was so incredibly disappointed. So I was like, oh no, everybody won but me. And so I was very upset. And so my mother said, well, you need to feed and water your rabbits, because you can't go and look at anything else or go run around with your friends or check out the Midway or whatever until you've done your chores, just like at home. So I went over to the rabbit cage. I was a little disgruntled at these rabbits because they had not produced a ribbon. And so lo and behold, in the water dish was the remains of the Grand Champion ribbon. And they had completely shredded. I mean, all the way around the edges. It was just all chewed up and in the bottom of their water dish. And so I was happy. And then they got me another ribbon, as I recall. But that was my very first experience.
It's quite an experience.
It was an experience.
Wow. And it never dawned on you to try to figure out who had gotten Grand Champion?
No, heavens no. I just knew I didn't get anything.
It was a ribbon. You just think it's a ribbon. How funny. And so tell us about some of your 4-H, what 4-H club did you belong to?
Well, I became more active in 4-H once we moved to Pittsburgh County, and our school was one of the few that still had 4-H that met during the school day and in the school. So we had like the biggest enrollment actually in Carter County. We had over 100 4-H members in our club in the grade school, and then the same in high school. And so I was involved with the Dixon 4-H Club, and we did not have FFA in our school. And we did have an agriculture program, but there was not FFA. And so I never was an FFA member, which is kind of ironic since I got to spend about 2 years being the interim department head for Ag Ed here at OSU, and working with ag teachers and training folks that were going to become ag teachers, but I never was an ag teacher, never was an FFA. But I was involved with 4-H all the way through high school, and did, the traditional kinds of events and activities and trips and so forth.
Who were some of your leaders?
Well, I had a number of club leaders that were really active and important in my life. One of those was Nancy Mayer, and the Mayer family continues to be involved with extension programs in Carter County. All the younger generation, the ones that were kids that were younger than me that are now adults. Gene Owen was another one of our 4-H volunteers at the time, and Jeannie Jones was another one of the leaders that was very active in the club that I was involved in. But there were lots of folks that helped, obviously, with such a huge program. And Monroe Sumter was the extension agent in Carter County during the major time that I was involved. Whenever I first moved to Carter County, George Hall was the 4-H agent. And then shortly after that, he left Extension and went to work at the stockyards. And I'm still involved with the Sirloin Club and see George, and he always thinks it's kind of funny to talk about how I was one of his 4-Hers. And then Monroe was there pretty much through the whole time that I was involved through high school. And then Kent Barnes, who was an area extension specialist and retired a couple of years ago, was the 4-H agent at the time that I was getting out of 4-H and going off to college. So Kent never really was much of a 4-H agent as far as me being involved with the program, but it was still kind of fun for me to periodically tell folks that he was my 4-H agent, because he still looks younger than I do.
You talked about Nancy Meyer being pretty influential in your early 4-H. How so?
Just being there, always being supportive. All of those folks were really good about, we would go to one of them's home before we would come to Roundup, for example. We would always go, and everyone had to practice giving their speech, and we would always have fun, have a little picnic, whatever. But we were pretty competitive and doing things. Our club always wanted to win, share the fun. Not as competitive as the music teacher that we had whenever I was in 4-H in Pittsburgh County at Haleyville. Naomi Reed was our music teacher, and she was the 4-H leader. And she was very creative and very competitive. And so we always had outstanding skits that she would put together. So I remember her as being somebody that really pushed us to do well.
Do you remember specifically any of the skits? Can you describe any of those?
Yes, I can. One, and today it probably would not be considered to be politically correct, I'm not sure. But there was a song about Reuben and Rachel. Reuben, I've been thinking. I don't know how the rest of the song goes. But it was we did a little polka type dance to Reuben and Rachel. And it was all guys. And we were half of our body was dressed as a girl and the other half as a guy. So our parents, our mothers, created these outfits that we were one half girl, one half guy. We had half a wig. I mean, it was pretty elaborate. And as we would do our little dance and, do our little arm swing, polka type stuff around, half the time we were Reuben and half the time we were Rachel. So I do remember that as one of the ones that we did.
You talked about your 4-H meetings being part of the school curriculum, part of the school day. Tell me, how did that work?
Well, we had an assigned day that we would have 4-H, and we would always meet in the science teacher's classroom. It was one of the bigger rooms, and Carol Jean Thomason was one of the folks that allowed us to do that, and she helped with the program. And a lot of times somebody from the extension office would come and present something, or we always had some 4-H member that would give a talk and somebody that would do a demonstration. And we encourage that. That's still part of what's, we prescribe that these things should happen at a 4-H meeting. I know a lot of times it doesn't. But that was very important. That was part of the calendar that we did every year, and you knew months in advance that on that week you were going to do a talk or a demonstration. And it really encouraged us to begin to develop some of those speaking skills at the local level, and then whenever we would go and do a county contest, it wasn't so overwhelming.
So those meetings were monthly?
Yes, right.
And you talked a little bit about some of the leaders, et cetera, how they influenced you. Can you tell us what years you entered 4-H, and kind of give us a time frame? Sure.
Well, you can do the math. I was in 4-H for the whole nine years that I could be. So, and I graduated from high school in 1975. So from the 4th grade to the 12th grade, I was involved. And I really was I wasn't involved in collegiate 4-H. In fact, I didn't even know there was a collegiate 4-H group whenever I was in college here, and never really gave a thought at all about ever working in extension. Never crossed my mind. Nobody ever talked about it as a possibility. And even whenever I took the job, my plan was that it was a short-term kind of a gig. But I think that a lot of those early experiences that I had helped me see the opportunities that were out there, places that I went, trips I went on, and so forth, that a lot of times I didn't even have the good sense to apply to go. But Monroe Sumter, who was our extension agent at the time, would sign me up, and he'd call and say, oh, you're getting ready to go to DC, or you're going to go to Leisure Lab, or you're going to forestry camp, or whatever. And I'd just say, okay, yeah, when do we go? And off we'd go. And so just having extension agents, extension educators now we call them, that kind of pushed, and those volunteers that would encourage and push us along, I think really helped. But it was not something that I came to OSU saying, oh, one day I'm gonna do that.
So describe some of the trips you went on.
Probably, I mean, of all the trips that I've gone on throughout the years, probably the most memorable is one that probably would get someone fired today. And I shouldn't probably tell this. Monroe is still living. But we went to forestry camp, okay, down at Beavers Bend State Park. And it had been hot, and we were tired, and we were ready to leave, and they wouldn't let you leave early. Max Craighead and Bill Altman were the specialists in charge. You didn't leave early. Well, Monroe, I don't know if he had something that he wanted to do on Saturday or needed to get back, but no, we couldn't leave. So we decided that after they did cabin check, we were leaving. So we had all of our things gathered up, and there were, it was Monroe and probably 4 or 5, I think all boys that went on this trip. And right after they did cabin check, we all snuck out, loaded our stuff in Monroe's car, headed back to Ardmore. Well, yeah, and it's a pretty good drive from Beavers Bend State Park down in Broken Bow all the way back to Ardmore. And we probably had not gone 20 miles, and Monroe was ready to go to sleep. And so he said, well, who here has their driver's license? None of us had a driver's license. I did have a learner's permit at the time, so I was, at least 15 and a half. So he got in the back seat and went to sleep, and another one of the guys got in the passenger seat, and I drove. We did not know where we were going, how to get there, but the other guy could halfway read a map, and here we headed back to Ardmore in the middle of the night, and we got, I think, around Tishomingo or someplace. I was so sleepy. By this time, it's probably, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And so we stopped, and we had to use a payphone to call our parents. And so here we're all calling our parents at wee hours of the morning, saying, well, we're back. You need to come pick us up. I do recall that none of the parents were real happy about that. And I'm sure that Monroe probably got a call from whoever the district director was at that time. And, I think back on that, about how crazy that was, and how if we had an extension educator that did that today, how we would have gotten a call in the state office and how we would have had to have dealt with that. But that was probably one of the most memorable things. I don't remember. I do think I won an award at that camp for, being a good camper, but they probably would have taken it away afterwards.
Monroe's secret with us.
There you go. All right, good.
So any other trips that you remember going on?
Oh, Lord. From the time that I was a kid all the way up until my recent retirement, heavens, I have been on so many trips. And that's one thing that I tell young educators. Certainly the opportunities that I had as a 4-H member, the trips that I went on, out-of-state trips, national trips, whatever, judging team trips, they were all memorable and they were great. But the times that I've gotten to chaperone and the number of young people that I've gotten to interact with over the 30 plus years, it's just unreal. And being involved in a professional association, the very first activity that I attended after becoming an employee was our 4-H Agents Association meeting. The summer of '79, they were promoting going to Colorado Springs for the national meeting. I didn't go that first, but from the next year on through most of my professional career, I didn't do it so much whenever I became state leader, because I really wanted to provide opportunities and budget for other people to make some of those trips, and I had plenty to go to as state program leader, so I didn't always go to NAE 4HA. But there was a long period of time in there that I never missed a national meeting, and had opportunities to go to so many places and to do so many things that I would have never done had I not gotten involved in a professional association. So for young extension educators, or any profession as far as that goes, it's very important to get involved in a professional association and to take advantage of some of those opportunities. So, and then obviously being on the state staff, and then the years of being a state program leader, I've over my career been to pretty much every state in the United States for something related to extension. Now, a lot of times it was like Yeah, all the hotel conference rooms have pretty much the same color walls. But, there's always a little time to see and do a few things. Went to a couple of national meetings or program leader meetings, for example, in Puerto Rico. I don't know if I'd ever gone to Puerto Rico, but had that opportunity a few times. And, we have had exchange folks with the Labo program from Japan that have been in our home, and just lots of opportunities.
So backing up just a little bit, we've kind of already established that you were familiar with Oklahoma State due to going to Roundup and that type of interaction, and you went there, got a degree, but really had no intent or just didn't have the idea yet to join Extension or even to make it a career. So how did you come about applying for your first Extension job?
Okay. Well, the 2 summers before I graduated, I had gone back home and worked. And at that time, my dad was helping a person get their farm and ranch back into production. It had fallen out of production. It was all overgrown. It was a place full of rocks. And I spent 2 summers building fence, hauling rocks, plowing all day. And I was pretty sure that I did not want to do that the rest of my life. So in fact, I knew that the summer after I graduated from college, I had to have a job doing something someplace else, okay? Or that's probably what I was going to be doing again. So I needed a job, and my roommate at the time was going to interview with Extension. And he said, why don't you fill out the paperwork and turn it in and interview with them too? And it was a process kind of like we have today of getting into an approved applicant pool, but instead of interviewing with the head of HR and a couple of other folks, we interviewed with the 5 district directors. And I didn't know much about it. I'd been in 4-H, but I didn't know sickum about what all was involved with Extension. And whenever I went through the process, the district directors then would talk about the candidates, and if there was somebody they liked, they would kind of, I'm sure, dicker over who was going to get who. And then once you were hired, you would go for up to 3 months to different locations, kind of go through an orientation process before you even knew what county you were going to end up in. Well, I didn't care as long as it wasn't back in that field picking up rocks or building fence. So I went through the process, and so did my roommate. We were both offered opportunities to work in Extension. And I remember, the only question that I remember in the interview, Howard Powell was the Northwest District Director at the time, and he asked me, so what do you see yourself doing in 10 to 15 years if you went to work in Extension, if we hired you in Extension? And I said, well, Mr. Powell, what exactly is it that you do? And he hired me anyway. So what he did say, smart aleck little whatever. But I never was the district director. Have thought about a time or two that might be kind of fun, because that's, I think, the place where you can most make things happen. But I never applied to be a district director. So Howard Powell didn't convince me that it was a good thing, or maybe he did. And I thought, no, I don't want to be Mr. Powell. But I interviewed, and they offered me the opportunity to go to Northwest Oklahoma. I had never really spent any time in Northwest Oklahoma. I was down along the Red River. And so I said, fine, okay, I'll take the job. And Bill Fanning, Bob LaValle, Steve McKinley, and I all started in the same group. And Charlotte Richard was also, I think, in our group. And Bill Fanning and I ended up being assigned to go to Alva. We spent a little time on campus. and then we went out there. And Bill ended up going to Woodward County as a 4-H agent, and I stayed in Alva in Woods County. I had never seen so much wheat and so much flat ground in my life, but I loved it. I loved that part of the state. Best people in the world. There are good people everywhere. But the people there took me in, and I felt so at home. Particularly, I really got most involved with some of my 4-H families that lived around Freedom and Winoka, some of that area.
Do you remember any names?
Yeah, sure. Probably the family that I got most involved with were the Hughes family at Freedom. Boyd and Nelwyn were the parents, and they had 3 sons and a daughter. And I still have some contact with 2 of the sons on a fairly regular basis. The oldest and the youngest. The oldest was 16 and ready for adventure and all those kinds of things. So I got to take him actually to CWF, and that was fun. And the youngest one wanted to be in 4-H so much, Devry. And Devry actually has kids himself. He lives at Morrison now. And Devry was so excited to get to be in 4-H, wanted to be in 4-H so bad. And so the summer that he was going to turn 9, he had made all kinds of projects for the county fair. I remember that. But then Chris Stansberry, who works for OSU, doing some things with the research station, was one of my 4-Hers from out there. So it's kind of amazing folks that I had contact with way back when that I continue to have contact with. And there have been so many 4-H members over the years, particularly ones that I may have taken on a trip, took them to National 4-H Congress or Denver or wherever, that of course they all remember me, and I don't necessarily always remember them, or I might recognize their face or whatever. And they're like, "Oh, you remember me?" I do, but your name has slipped me. Help me out. So I'm nothing like Ray Parker. Ray Parker has always fascinated me from the time that I was a kid up through adulthood, because Ray Parker always remembers everyone's name and everybody in their family, and I have never mastered that skill.
So tell me one thing that happened while you were in Woods County that you don't think you'll ever forget.
Interestingly, I went back as part of the Centennial. They invited those of us that had worked in the office to come back for the little Centennial celebration. So Karen Armbruster, I was a county director, and we hired her while I was there. She organized that event, and so it was fun because now Carrie Gideon was there when I first started. Carrie wasn't able to come back for the event, unfortunately, but Don Wormuth, who was the ag agent whenever I went there, came back, and so Don was there, and Bob LaValle was able to be there, and Jim Rhodes, Greg Heifel. So it was like all of us ag agents who had come and gone, and Karen, she's outlasted all of us. But I went in, we had that upstairs in the courthouse and kind of the lobby area, had the reception, and got to visit with a lot of folks that I still remembered. But then I wanted to go down and check out the office to see how it looked. Well, one of the things that I remember, and the secretary, Barbara Case, remembered it too whenever I reminded her. We did a lot of school enrichment programs whenever I was there. Did a lot of embryology, and not only chickens, but we also did bobwhite quail. And after the first time that we did an embryology program in a school, and we had a failure of an incubator and nothing hatching, and it was so traumatic that from then on, anytime I did embryology, or after I left there and I went to Logan County, I always made sure that I had an incubator going in the office at the same time, so that if something didn't hatch at a school that night, the teacher and I could trade out all the broken eggs for live animals. So I was gone to an in-service or something, and I told Barbara, check the eggs, turn those quail eggs every day, and I made a little X on one side. She was laughing about how I was so, you've got to make sure you turn them this time and this time. Turn them whenever you get here in the morning, turn them whenever you get ready to leave. And she was laughing about turning the eggs. But the other part of the story was that the quail all hatched. And they all hatched one night. And so the next morning we got to work, and here was this incubator full of these little quail. And we had them up on kind of a countertop that it set up against the wall, but it wasn't really fastened to the wall. There was no way to move it out because it was set in the corner of the room. And of course it was full of all kinds of stuff. Well, the incubator was on top of that. And we lifted the lid off the incubator, and baby quail went everywhere, including down behind the shelf. And so we hatched all of them we could that were running all over the office, get them in a box, and we knew that some had gone behind. So here we are, we have dowel rods and yardsticks, anything we can, and we're up on the countertop trying to scoot these quail out from behind there. And I hope that we managed to find them all. We trust that we did. We didn't ever hear any more chirping later in the day. It wasn't like crickets. But she was laughing about how everybody would come in, and there we all were up on that thing trying to get the quail. So that's probably the one of the two things that I remember about Woods County. The other was, and I've shared this story with educators about the importance of making a name for yourself whenever you go to a new location. I always encourage them, do a news column, put your picture in the paper with the news column so people begin to associate you and know who you are as part of the community. Because whenever I went to Woods County, Don Wormuth had been there for 32 years. And he went to become the ag agent in Garfield County in Enid. But he still maintained a home in Alva. And so every Friday afternoon, he was back at Alva, and he was there and visible all weekend, and everybody knew Don, and so they would call Don for everything. And so I thought, well, now this is not going to work out real well for me trying to establish myself as being the person. And so the county fair time was coming. So we go to the county fair. Everything seems to be going fairly smooth. And this little kid, actually one of the fair board members' sons, is out playing in front of the women's building on a frost-free hydrant. Probably turning it on, filling up water balloons, I don't know. But in the process of them running, playing tag, whatever, the frost-free hydrant gets broken off down in the ground. And so we suddenly have a geyser going. And it's the entry day at the fair. Not a good thing. So there's water shooting as high as the building, mud, all that. People, ladies, tried to bring in their pies and all those things into the building. So the fair board president was there, and we couldn't even get to the shutoff valve because now there's mud and water and everything else. So, and as the mud is spraying, all that, of course, is going in the hole, filling it up, so you couldn't even get to it to turn it off. So we dug it out the best we could. He took the shovel and diverted it so the water was spraying not right up on me. And I'm laying in the mud, digging out the hole, shutting off the water. And then he and I dig out the hole, replace the hydrant and all that. And by this time, we have a huge audience of people watching us roll around in the mud. And after it was over, one of the folks standing there said, well, this kid's going to be good because Don Wormuth would have never done that. It was like, yes, I've arrived.
You went through the door.
I have, exactly. So those are two things that I really remember from that county.
Small things, but you remember.
Yeah, exactly.
So after Woods County, you went to, I think you said.
To Logan County, to
Logan
Guthrie,
County.
yes.
And what precipitated that change? How did you make the decision to do that?
Well, whenever I first had gone to Woods County, it was a 3-staff county, and that was at the beginning of the county commissioner bribe kickback scandal thing, and budgets went bad, and we had gone to 2 staff. So I'd spent part of my time there, first as a 4-H agent, and then as the first 4-H agent / county director. And then the budget went bad and we weren't able to fill the 3rd position. So then I was, more the traditional 2-staff county. And I enjoyed the county, but back then, whenever people wanted somebody, they kind of just would recruit them. Hey, consider applying for this county, whatever. And Logan County was a 3-staff county. It was a little more central. It was 2 hours closer to home. I still didn't want to go back and pick up rocks, but it was nice to be able to go home and visit occasionally. And it was a 5.5-hour drive from Alva back home. So, those were some of the rationale at the time. I also tell the story that whenever we were in Woods County, there was one photocopy machine in the whole town in the county clerk's office, and we could make 5 copies a day. And whenever I went to Logan County, we had our very own copy machine. Now, the building was a piece of trash, but we had a copier. Granted, it was one that was like a giant roll of paper, and you pulled it out and tore it off at the end, but you could make as many copies as you wanted to stand there and tear off. So that was, I always say that it was the technology that drew me there, but it was more this central location. And then once I got there, it did provide an opportunity to go back to school and so forth as well.
So what year did you move to Logan County?
I moved there in the summer of '81. So I was 2 years in Alva, and then I moved there and stayed there for 10 years.
And you were there as the 4-H agent?
No, I went there as an ag agent and county director.
And they did not have they were not.
Actually, we had a 4-H agent at the time. Dennis Bailey was our 4-H agent, and Mary Parrott Selk was the FCS educator. And Dennis, not long after that, went to McCurtain County, and Becky Larkin Bedwell was our 4-H agent.
And so while you were in Logan County, you started on your master's or your doctorate?
My master's.
And what did you get that in?
In ag ed.
Okay. How did you make the decision that was going to be the degree program?
Primarily convenience. There weren't very many opportunities to do other degree areas, working full time and going to school at night because we couldn't do things online. So driving to campus usually twice a week, 2 evenings a week, and worked on the degree.
And during that time, between the time when you first started extension and you ended up leaving Logan County, span of 12 years?
About 12 years.
So were there any changes or any historical differences that happened during that time that you recall?
Well, there were some really tight budget years for extension during that time. And that was during the period of time that we had a lot of counties that went to units. And it was a very difficult time for staff. There were, in fact, we've never really looked at it in a scientific way, but my observation was whenever we began the career ladder several years later than that. The first few years of the career ladder, my observation was that a lot of folks who had been in those 2 county units had a much more difficult time advancing in the career ladder system, because I think they just spent all their time managing events and activities and didn't get to develop programs or do evaluation or grow professionally or whatever. So I don't know that there was any other way that we could have gotten around those difficult budget years without having some counties in units, short of closing more county offices. But it certainly, for most educators, was a disservice to them. So I think that was probably one of the biggies during that time. Obviously, there were some changes administratively on campus during that time that probably drove part of that.
And then after you were in Logan County, started working on your master's, when did you start working on your doctorate, and how did you make that decision?
Well, I applied for and was hired to be an extension specialist, and at that time, extension specialists did not have to have a PhD, you had to just have a master's. And so I interviewed and was hired in 1988, to come to campus to be part of the state 4-H staff. My main responsibility was curriculum, but that also included a lot of events and activity coordination and so forth. So over the years that I was in the state 4-H office, from 1988 to 2013, I pretty much got to do every job there at some time or another. But I came there primarily to do curriculum, and never felt like I got to devote very much time to doing curriculum, because shortly after I got there, Wallace Smith called me into his office and said, "I've decided to retire, and you're the only person here who has ever had administrative responsibility, and you don't have a doctorate, so you're not going to be applying to be the program leader, and so you're going to be the interim." And that lasted for close to a year, the very first drop of the hat. And then I had lots of opportunities to serve in different administrative roles from that point forward, off and on, and officially, and through changes and structures and all kinds of things.
Who, you talked about Wallace Smith, but who preceded him as the state 4-H director?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. We may have to look that up. I'm not really sure who had been. We'll have to look that in the history book, because we put all those in order with the dates. I'm not exactly sure.
So after him, when you served as the year of
okay,
interim?
and then I did the interim thing, and then Jim Rutledge became program leader, and then he was there until the time that Dean Browning decided that he was going to put 4-H as a unit with Ag Ed and Ag Communications, and Jim that didn't go so well. And he had an opportunity to go to Oregon, and so he did that. Then I served again as interim program leader during that time period, and Jim Lysing was hired to be the department head for Ag Communications, Ag Leadership, and 4-H. And that did not go well. There was too diverse. There was no way that somebody could be administratively responsible for 3 separate units, because we never came together as one. And he tried lots of different things and was not successful. And I think part of that was that he inherited an impossible situation, and then personality-wise, his background was all ag ed. That's where he fit best. And after about 5 or 6 years of that, we had an opportunity to divide back out, and we did.
So what was Dean Browning's, this might be your opinion, but what do you think was the basis of that decision to put those under the department head? Was it based on budget?
Primarily. It was 3 very small units, and whenever you think about their functions in contrast to what other academic departments were, all 3 were pretty much service type units. I mean, AgCom Services was very much a service unit because they weren't the academic part that was already in ag ed. They were doing things for extension primarily and for the division that were more service oriented. Certainly our function was primarily programmatic and service and not academic. And the ag ed role was a lot of what they were doing. While it was not an extension type function, it was also a type of service because their main function was to train and graduate future ag teachers. So 3 small units, a way to cut some administrative cost. And not that I think that he really saved that much administratively. He was able to tell central administration, look, we've combined, we've done those things. So I think it was primarily budget driven. At the time that we split those functions back out, the budget was still bad. It was kind of like that every 5-year cycle whenever we go up and down. And so at that point, Linda Harriman was the program leader in Family Consumer Sciences. And so she came over to be the assistant director for FCS and 4-H, and I continue to do the day-to-day state program leader kinds of things. She got to go to most of the meetings, administrative meetings, and I got to deal with most of the problems. Somebody called wanting to sue, somebody called unhappy, whenever there was a risk management question, whatever, those all came to me.
Yeah. She got the fun stuff.
I don't know.
Really.
Those administrative meetings were awfully boring at times.
And that time frame was around 2000?
Yeah.
And so after, how did you become state program leader? When and how did that happen?
Well, whenever Linda came over, she wanted somebody that we could identify as program leader. And so I was basically appointed. I don't even know that for the program leader role when Linda was here. I'm not sure that I even went through an interview process. And part of it also was the fact that I had been offered an opportunity to go to Tennessee, and Ray Campbell was the associate director at the time, and he was pretty much like, we're going to do whatever it takes to make you stay here and not let you go to Tennessee. So that worked out well for me. And then whenever Linda retired, the budget had gotten better, and she really advocated for the need to have the FCS role split from the 4-H role. And so we were able to do that. And at that time, I did go through a process, and I think there were 1, maybe 2 other candidates that applied for the position from other states, but they picked me.
And in that role, what were some of the most memorable things that you recall during that time?
Well, I can remember lots of horror stories, obviously, of problems that came that we had to deal with. I think the thing that I would say, and it's not necessarily one of the great things that I want to be remembered for as being program leader, one of the things that I did a lot of in my role as program leader was helping educators think about risk and liability. And that happened because during my first month of work, whenever I was in Woods County, we went to Tri-County Camp, and there was a 4-H'er from another county. It wasn't my county, but a 4-H'er that drowned at camp. And people think, well, what was the deal? Were you swimming in a lake? What was the deal? No, it was a state park pool, 5 lifeguards on duty, fluke, accident. But those things happen. And so I spent a lot of time over pretty much my entire career in the state office, 20 plus years, of doing programs related to liability and risk and helping people understand that you have to go on, you have to do things, you can't avoid all of those liability and risk issues, but you need to plan for them, you need to insure against them, you need to make sure that you're running quality programs and that you're doing the right kinds of things to protect yourself. And I pretty much, through that time, became the specialist for extension, and at times was pretty involved with that for the whole university whenever it came down to talking about ways that we worked with young people. And then obviously the last year that I was there, we were involved with the university in helping determine how we should deal with young people on campus in light of the incidents that had occurred at Penn State. And I was pleased that we were always the program that the university would hold up to every other group that worked with young people and say, you need to do what 4-H does because they're doing all the right things. And so that's one of the things that I feel good about. I feel good about the fact that we had a lot of good quality programming going on the whole time. And it wasn't anything that I necessarily did. It was equipping and enabling good professional folks to do their job.
And what, looking back on your career, both as an adult, as a youth enrolled in 4-H, if you could sum up, what do you think 4-H means to you? Can you verbalize that even?
Well, I think not necessarily just 4-H, but extension as a whole. I tell people a lot of times that we do missionary work. Certainly there are a lot of folks that come to us that are going to be successful regardless. There are a lot of young people that we work with that their parents are involved and they're pushing them, and by golly, they're going to achieve whether they like it or not. But then there are a lot that come to us that may have, decent home life or maybe not such a good one, that need just an opportunity, or people that come that just need basic information. And there's so many people out there that still don't know that we even exist, or that they can come to us and get quality information. And so a lot of times people in extension have to be the evangelist first, go out and preach the word and get them, let them know that they have the need, and then do the missionary work to follow them along and push them along. And I think the people that are successful in extension, well, in fact, whenever I did my master's study, I looked at the factors that motivated extension professionals to remain in the profession. Mm-hmm. And the number one thing was the desire to work with people. And if you don't have a desire to work with people, you're not willing to put other people ahead of yourself, you will never be successful in extension. You either won't be happy, or you're not going to be somebody that people are going to want to come to, because the old thing of you got to show people that how much you care first, and that's exactly right.
Any other words of wisdom you'd give to a new educator coming into the system today?
Um, I think it's more challenging for people coming into the system today because of technology. You know, we have made it so that you are always available. You know, we were always on call early on. You know, you couldn't go to church or the grocery store or your kids' play or whatever without having to answer questions, you know, giving out information. And so we were always available. But a few years ago, we took a vacation. One of the things that I didn't do nearly enough whenever I was working in extension, even though we had all that leave, you know, didn't ever use it. And it dawned on me about the third day, whenever the rest of the family was still asleep, and I was out on the beach in Hawaii going through my email and answering questions or getting text messages or whatever. And I thought, no, I'm supposed to be on vacation. And so I, every morning, would get up, check and answer anything, and then I would lock the phone in the glove compartment so that I would not even be tempted to get it out of my pocket. Or, and I think that it's important for our employees today to realize they don't have to be on call all the time, because I know a lot of them get burned out because they never take time for themselves. And it's kind of a catch-22. If you're a good educator and you care about people and you want to help people and you want to be available to people, you don't take care of yourself. But if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of other people.
Sure. Anything else that you've thought about that we haven't talked about today that you want to share?
I don't know. There's probably something, but heavens, who knows?
Okay, Charles, we thank you for the interview. You did a great job, as always. We appreciate your years of service.
Thanks.
If you don't know that, we do, and we miss you. I know you haven't been gone a really long time, but we miss you.
But you know, I can just tell you, I miss the people, I miss activities and so forth. But after the first week, it was not hard at all to not get up and go to work. Not at all.
Thank you very much.
You bet.